Good evening.
Good evening.
So I'm going to do the Schoenberg improvisation, which is going to be, again, very atonal. And the reason, Schoenberg's a great composer. I'm not trying to poke fun at him. What Schoenberg and people around him at that time in visual art too, Picasso and all these, what they were doing was they were reacting to a world that was no longer as, quote, normal as it had been. I don't know if it ever was, but the 20th century, Yeah. And so you look at something like Guernica by Picasso, and that sort of, it distills what a lot of the 20th century was, unfortunately. You can't do a romantic landscape painting to express what that is. But anyway, this improvisation is obviously going to be kind of on the parody, funny side, I hope. What I need from you is a popular tune, maybe not Happy Birthday because I play that too much, but something like a melody like that, and I'm going to do that in the style of Schoenberg. It's going to be weird. Anybody?
You are my sunshine.
Really?
That's a good one.
Okay, so which in Schoenberg is going to be not very sunny, so. All right, so let's see what happens. I told you it would be weird. I remember last time this thing came out of the piano. So, all right, now, as I said, that's the style of Schoenberg. Don't blame me if you didn't like it. It's Schoenberg's fault. So now I'm going to play Bach, which is obviously different. I'm going to play the aria in D major from the Third Orchestral Suite, and this piece is very famous, but not on piano so much. The piano version is by Alexander Siloty, a Russian composer who studied with Liszt, not shabby at all. And he, actually his specialty was transcriptions of the music of Bach. And so this piece, let me play you the opening, you'll recognize it probably. You've probably heard it, but with strings, not with the piano. Yeah, it's adagio, right. So, here a few things about Bach. I mean, Bach, you think of an aria as something in an opera aria, an air in English, right, sung. But this is not that. And Bach did not write a single opera. He wrote cantatas for the church. He was a church organist and music director and teacher. He taught Sunday school. He taught Latin to kids. I don't know. Speaking of kids, he had over 20 kids. Yeah, I don't know. I have 2 kids, and it's hard to, I feel like I'm drained. So I don't know how So, but at any rate, there's, Bach was relatively unknown in his lifetime. And there's a famous story about Handel, who was well known, lived in London, Handel did. And Handel was traveling near where Bach was working. It must have been Leipzig or one of the major churches he was at. And, Bach wanted to meet him, but Handel said, I don't have time to meet a provincial church organist, pretty much. Which is just, it's crazy to imagine that. But Bach was just not that well known in his lifetime. There is this great spiritual, feeling in Bach. And there's a quote I like, I have to look up who said it, that when God speaks to angels, it probably sounds like Bach. But when angels talk to each other, it probably sounds like Mozart. I like that. It's really, but in all seriousness, this piece, there's a feeling of no time. And I think that's, on the one hand, you could think of that in a religious, theological sense, but also in those days, their sense of time was not like ours. Time moves faster, so to speak, for us nowadays than back then. I like to listen to a lot of crazy things in the car. I listened to some 14th century music the other day, and you want to talk about slow and timeless, that's that, because I think in those days, they weren't in such a rush the way we are now. So at any rate, here is the Bach Silotti aria. Thank you. In those days and before, there was also this thing that musicians and painters and writers even, they didn't care so much about their ego. In other words, so many medieval and Renaissance pieces of music are simply by anonymous. They wouldn't even bother to write their name. See, nowadays in the arts, it's all about, I mean, I'm not trying to generalize, but there's a lot more of that self, it's about me. And that started, I think, in the 19th century, where we're going to go next, where on the one hand, with Romanticism, the individualism, which is a good thing on the one hand, but on the other hand, it can go too far as with anything. But at any rate, I'm going to play another piece I've played for you before. I think I did that Bach last time. I do have a few new things, because usually we're on this schedule here, where I'm able to learn. I think I may have played some of the ones I'm going to play for you now, warming up. Remember last time when the dinner hadn't been served? So I had the sheet music, but now they've sort of migrated to my memory, hopefully. But this is going to be quite long. This is from the Beethoven Violin Concerto, which I've been really living with for a long time, because you have to live with a piece like this for a long time. And I'm going to do the second and third movements. I've done the first here a lot, maybe the second I've done, but the third I did once last time. But anyway, I'm going to do those two movements. And you know what? I had a professor at school, music theory professor in composition, really brilliant guy. And he said that for him, with Bach's music, there's like the background or the wallpaper almost, if you think of it like that. Behind him is the Protestant hymn, Lutheran hymns. And you could hear it there in the last one I played. He said with Beethoven, the backdrop to Beethoven is always silence because of his deafness. And that's true. You're going to notice there's a lot of pauses in his music where there's just literally silence. And even in the parts that there aren't silence, and there's almost like an emptiness there. As he lost his hearing, which was rather gradual, he isolated himself from people. And that's one of the many, sad aspects. His life was sad, but it was also triumphant in a way, because he almost gave up around this time. This is 1806. He wrote in a letter to his brother, the Heilige Stadt Testimony, he wrote that he was considering to take his own life at that time. But he didn't, because he reached into himself and found this will to keep composing no matter what. And I think that's the essence of Beethoven. It's just, with all the struggle in life, there's that hope and triumph and joy. Think of the Ninth Symphony. Listen to the whole thing sometime. Everyone listens to the end, but you got to listen to the whole thing. And it's pretty dark. It's tragic even. And then at the end, of course, is the Ode to Joy. Because Beethoven was ultimately, yes, he was a romantic and everything, but he was an Enlightenment figure. He was not too different from a Rousseau, Locke, Voltaire, with this hope and sort of optimism in human nature. So this violin concerto, the conductor, Adrian Bolt, British conductor, liked to conduct with a very long baton. I don't know, it's almost funny to watch, but he's a great conductor. He said that he sees the violin concerto as a piece of philosophical acceptance. And you definitely hear that in the second movement, which is pastoral. It's almost like the Bach in a way, but you hear these French horns. Those are French horns. And at the time, the 18th century, or the early 19th century, an audience would hear that and they'd say, oh, that's the countryside, equals the countryside. They'd recognize that. So, but what happens is, it turns into the third movement, it segues into the third movement. It's just so joyful. It's overjoyed. And the third movement is a country dance that was popular in Austria at the time, the Ländler, which is in 3, like the waltz. It's kind of a cousin of the waltz. It's 1, 2, 1. It's a little heavier than a waltz. It's a little more rustic farmer type. 1, 2, 1, 2. Probably a few kegs of good German beer, yeah, and Oktoberfest, yeah. Because I have this image of these two movements. This second movement, I imagine, is Beethoven or someone wandering through the countryside and really feeling quite peaceful, maybe reflecting on life, but there's a peace and tranquility, and there's a solitude there too, feeling of solitude. And Beethoven, he did this. He spent a lot of time in the countryside. He loved it. But then he comes across a group of farmers having a little party, and he joins them. And that's the thing. Beethoven often does this with large-scale pieces. The first several movements are philosophical and tragic and everything, but then at the end it's a celebratory thing. So I've told you this before, but the reason he rewrote it for piano, this piece, is because the violin concerto's first performance was an utter disaster. Half the audience fell asleep after the first movement. Franz Clement, the violinist, bit of a hooligan apparently, he took his violin, flipped it upside down, and improvised a fiddle tune to wake everybody up. And Beethoven was not very happy about this whole thing, so he rewrote it as a piano concerto. And we have this alternative version. And the funny thing is that the cadenzas, Beethoven left blank for the violin version. But for the piano version, he actually wrote out cadenzas. And some violinists take the piano cadenzas and adapt it for the violin. So when my violin friends complain, they say, "Why are you stealing my repertoire?" I said, well, actually, it's just, he wrote cadenzas for the piano version. So anyway, here's the second and third movements of the Beethoven, and a little longer than my usual thing. It's all like 20 minutes combined. Not as long as my drive time. For the traffic. All right. piece, and that's only 2 and 3. I played you the first movement before, and the first movement's even longer. But it has to be long, because it's Beethoven needs that time to tell you what he's telling you. And YouTube is a great thing, or it can be. I mean, it can be a great source of learning in certain things. Maybe not medicine, but but it is in music you can find so many things. And I've been listening to, or watching rather, a production of Fidelio, Beethoven's only opera, and it's I forget what orchestra, I should know, but it's Leonard Bernstein's conducting it, and it has subtitles, and I'm not done with it, but the symbolism of the plot is, it's so. What's the word? You learn a lot about, or it's like a window into Beethoven's soul and what he was all about, really. I think that my teachers have always told me that if you really want to know a composer well, look at their operas, if they wrote any. Brahms didn't write any, and Bach didn't, but Beethoven wrote one, and he said it was a pain in the neck to write it, and he was never happy with it. Then you have somebody like, Giuseppe Verdi, who wrote 1 million operas. Anyway, so have you heard of a composer named Joachim Raff, R-A-F-F? Really? No, I'm just kidding. Neither have I until now. I hadn't heard of him until I learned this piece, the Cavatina by Raff. He was a Swiss composer, very popular in his lifetime. I mentioned Bach wasn't. Well, Raff was. People said he's as great as Beethoven and Schumann, no doubt. And he's a great composer. I heard his music, some of his symphonies recently in the car, and it's amazing. But we've sort of forgotten him, and it's too bad. There are a lot of very great overlooked composers and writers and poets and things. And there's also some overlooked ones who maybe aren't so great, like Daniel Steibelt. Well, you heard of him? He was a guy who wrote, he only wrote fast music because he couldn't play slow. All right, slow. And apparently his wife accompanied him on the tambourines whenever he played piano. And there's a story that I don't know, Steibelt, I don't know his music well enough to judge him, but people consider him not so great. He challenged Beethoven to a piano contest, kind of. And he wrote out this very nice theme and variations, and he played it very properly. And then Beethoven was up next. Beethoven took the sheet music, turned it upside down, and improvised this incredible fantasy, and Steibelt was not happy. But Steibelt is the first composer in a piano concerto to use an all-male chorus, which Busoni later did. So there's an innovation right there. So even then, we shouldn't overlook Steibelt. And what's it? Yeah, there it is. Yeah. I like that. It's okay. It's no need to be. No one's supposed to be embarrassed here because in those days, they were not so formal about classical music the way we are. We're all, that's actually Wagner did it. He said, Wagner was a horrible person, and one of them, he was, anti-Semitic, anti-everything, and one of the things he did was he also removed the human element from concerts, that the lights all had to go down, no sounds. You sit in silence and listen whether you like it or, but that's not human. Come on, Anyway, so that's just to say it's okay if sounds human. So, do you know the composer Salieri, Antonio Salieri? Everybody knows him as a villain, and he's remembered as a mediocre composer, it's all not true. He did not hurt Mozart, didn't poison him. It's fake. They hardly knew each other. If anything, they respected each other. And again, Salieri, great composer. Maybe I'll learn some of his music and bring him. Really, great stuff. So the point is that just because a name of a composer is not famous doesn't mean that it ain't good. I think this is a beautiful piece, the Cavatina by Raff, R-A-F-F, Raff. So, here it is.
A little bit new for me, so my memory is.
Isn't that a nice piece? I just love it. It's so good. And it's a lesser known composer. Now, he's another composer that's not played all that much. Joseph Akron. Ever heard of him? So he was born in Lithuania, or what's now Lithuania. And he was very active in a group called the Society for Jewish Folk Music. The center of that was in St. Petersburg. And he and other composers collected Yiddish, Jewish folk music and adapted it into their compositions. Now that's not too different from what Dvorak did with Czech folk music, or someone like Borodin for Russian folk music. It's not out of the ordinary. And there was a thriving culture of Yiddish theater, literature, music, classical composers in this time. Places like St. Petersburg, Warsaw, Poland, and Odessa, and all these places. And Akron left in 1925. He saw what Europe was becoming, unfortunately. And the Nazis, they killed 6 million Jews during the Holocaust, and they tried to erase this culture, and they couldn't. And what happened is a lot of it actually migrated over here. And when I was living in New York, I participated in many concerts for an organization called YIVO, the Society for Yiddish Research. They have a giant library or archives with all these pieces of music, literature, plays. They put on productions of Yiddish theater. They put on concerts. And I actually played this with the violinist. By the way, this is my violin tribute program. Continues on and on as I keep finding new things. It's going to come to an end, I don't know, in a year or two. Then I'll have to do a vocal tribute program when I play, but that's another story. So this is my own arrangement or adaptation of this piece by Akron, which is called Hebrew Melody. And the Hebrew Melody is based on a tune that he recalls his father singing when he was a child. And the key, though, is that it's not just putting the folk tune there and that's that. It's very much in his own unique style as a composer. And Schoenberg, speaking about him earlier, Schoenberg said Akron is the greatest composer that people haven't heard of. So really, Akron, interestingly, he left Europe in 1925, came to this country, and ended up, like many, he was living in Southern California. He wrote a lot of movie music. And there's another composer, Korngold. It's kind of a fun name, but he's a great composer. He did the same thing. And it's not that, Hollywood was any diluted art form at all. No, because think about William Faulkner. He did that too in the 30s when he went broke, apparently. He went and wrote screenplays. So there was a lot of creative, and still a lot of creative stuff going on in that part of the world and the country. So at any rate, this is a Hebrew Melody of Akron. I think it's a very sad piece because it's in memoriam for his father. And I think also knowing the context of the Jewish Yiddish culture in Eastern Europe, it's not only in the Holocaust, but before, for so many generations, the pogroms, the relentless anti-Semitism, it just makes you think. And so I think this is a very sad piece. So. it's a pretty heavy stuff tonight. So I feel like I should do something a little lighter. I'm going to do some gospel soon, but I'll do maybe one more classical piece. Something I've done here already before, because I told you I can only learn so much in 1 month. Do you want to hear the Malagueña by Lecuona again? Or do you want to hear the Habanera, another Spanish piece by Sarasate? You want to hear that? Habanera, okay. So what is a habanera? It's a tasty pepper. But no, I mean, that's not what it is here. It's a type of dance. It's a Spanish dance, but it's kind of got some Cuban roots to it. Spanish music by itself is a melting pot of things. Spain was Arabic in the Middle Ages. There's a large gypsy population. There was a Jewish civilization, synagogues in Cordoba and places like that. When you mix all those together, you get Spanish music. In Cuba, all of that mixed with West African music, and then you have Cuban music. And one of my teachers, main teacher, Solomon Mikovsky, was from Cuba and assigned us all this Cuban music. And I think I played you one. Unfortunately, when he died, it was about a year ago, I played you a Cuban piece. But at any rate, I don't play too much of it because I don't feel like I quite have the style down. At least he reminded me like all the time that I didn't. And this wonderful accent, which I would impersonate him, and he didn't think it sounded like him, but that was one thing he was wrong about. He would tell me in this. I don't know why it always sounded like he was out of breath, and he'd say, "Robert, you don't understand this music. It's from Cuba." So anyway, yeah. Sorry, I did it. So the rhythm of the habanera is like this. What's supposed to come next? Yeah, exactly. Right. Such a Spanish piece by a French guy. Georges Bizet, So, Carmen. But this is Sarasate. Sarasate was Spanish. There's actually, speaking of YouTube, I was telling you, there's a recording of him on YouTube playing it himself. It's from 1904. He is having a really bad hair day because you'll see him, he had this big mustache, But I love this piece. It's really just wonderful. And it's so Spanish. It's so sunny in a way. I think that the climate of where composers live affects them. Talk about Eastern Europe, Lithuania is pretty dark and cold there, the Akron piece. Even though he lived in LA, I don't know if that changed his style. Beethoven was from Bonn, it's in what's now Germany also, but then you go somewhere like Spain, it's sunny and dry. I think it affects the music. So here is the Habanera by Sarasate, Pablo de Sarasate. I love that name. Sorry, I'm going a little over, but a little gospel now. I'm going to play Farther Along in a Southern gospel style. And yeah, I love this song. It's beautiful. I wish I could sing it, but you know, I can't do that.
Try.
Yeah, you don't want to.
But singing, you know, it sounds really good in my head. I can hear a beautiful voice singing, and then I open my mouth and then forget it. I was just, it's an uplifting song. It was also a very sad song. And you know, that some of the words are like, we'll understand it better by. I don't know why. I was just thinking today the whole day. Did you see the death of the great actor Gene? It's so sad. It's just, you know, and you just sometimes the words of these old hymns they bring some kind of comfort to those things. But anyway, I'm going to close with something a little more upbeat. I'm going to do a spiritual, and I'm going to play. It's called "Woke Up This Morning," and I'm going to do a little upbeat stuff with it. Let me just check one chord because I was. There it is. Okay, here it is. Okay, I just needed to be sure. Sorry. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming. Thank you.